Okay, welcome everyone. This is Pandio.com, and we do regular podcasts with thought leaders in the data science industry. And I'm really excited. I've got Tim Eller with me today. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate being here.
So today we've got a really interesting topic in front of us, and we're going to be talking about the potential of AI. So AI, is it massive potential, or is it just a bunch of massive potholes? And I think Tim is going to be able to give a really interesting perspective because he's deep into data science. He's deep into AI. He's worked for a lot of very interesting companies. So maybe just to get started, Tim, can you give the listeners a little bit of your background, kind of companies you've worked with, and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. So my background is in mathematics. I did pure mathematics, undergrad, master's, and then a PhD in differential geometry and string theory, but that doesn't pay very well. So in 2010, I came into industry and I joined the movement of what is now called data science. There weren't data science positions in 2010, or maybe I could be wrong, but that wasn't my first title. But then over the last decade, I had the fortune of working at Lyft, doing their first round of dynamic pricing algorithms. After that, I worked at Lux Valet, which was an on-demand valet service, which lasted for a few years until it was acquired by Volvo. But part of the group also went to Uber. So I went to Uber after that, and I did a lot more of the leadership. And it was at that time, doing Lux and Uber, that I started to see what were the big holes that were being missed within data science and machine learning. And when it goes wrong, why is it going wrong? So I would say in the last decade, there have been two major epochs within data science / machine learning. The first was the popularization of scikit-learn, which is the Python library for, training machine learning models. It made the common interface to say, here's what constitutes a model. Here's the common interface. Now you on your laptop can take a little bit of data, push go, and out comes a model on the other side. And so that was really exciting. And then the second epoch, what that meant was for the next 5 years, maybe 2010 through 2015, people were getting hired to build models, but they could only do so on their laptop. And it was still a Herculean effort to get a model into production. In the last few years, we've finally seen what I call the second epoch, which is software systems that make it easy to put these machine learning models into production. Machine learning models, or any kind of models you're talking about. And so you've got companies like Data Robot, but there's also analogs at AWS and GCP, AWS at SageMaker, for example. And you've got some frameworks that make it easy to organize your models, push go, and this thing is now humming along in production, ready to receive HTTP traffic. So those are the two epochs. And that has given birth to, or made very important, the third epoch, which is how can we verify that these decision-making apparatuses are doing in production what we hope? Because there's still many, many things that can go wrong. And this is what I've spent my last decade fighting against, trying to figure out how do we streamline not only those first two things, getting models into production, but now the important thing is how can I show the company, show myself, and then show my team and my company that these things are actually making the difference that we hoped.
Okay, so let's step back to that first epoch that you described, and this ability to actually build a model on a laptop. What's the driving force from the market perspective to even get to that point, right? We want to run models off of a laptop. Talk a little bit about kind of what were the drivers in the business that were pushing in that direction?
Well, I guess there's always been a desire for any business to be able to predict the future. And this is not a new idea. This is as old as business, is what's going to happen tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I think in ancient Greece, Thales was a 4th or 5th century BC Greek scientist, mathematician, who's regarded as maybe the first scientist. And he basically introduced the concept of futures in agriculture. So how do you invest money in certain crops based on what you think the weather is going to do going forward? And if you can predict that, then you can make money. So the idea of prediction is not new. But I would say the computer revolution, forget the internet, just being able to harness computing power on your laptop, that's really what enabled us to do this for real. It's like, oh, great, now I have a sizable amount of data. It's enough, and I have a powerful enough local machine that I can not have to apply for government grants to get access to a computer. I can, right here on my laptop, make predictions.
Mm-hmm. And so what did that look like at Lyft? I think Lyft was one of the first companies you said after you get your PhD that you worked at. So that was kind of in that first kind of period from 2010 to those first couple of years. So I mean, it must have been a fascinating time to be at Lyft.
Yeah.
Give us some insight on that. What was that like?
Yeah, so I'm sure Lyft is very, very different today from where it was when I was there in 2013/14. But when I joined Lyft, the pricing was very manual and coarse. There was a sense that, ooh, at rush hour, we should be turning up the price. But it wasn't, there was not a rigorous defense of why we should be raising price. When pressed, somebody could say, oh, we have this feeling that raising price is actually going to, well, we have, at rush hour, we have a lot of demand. Pricing is going to cut down some of that demand. And the reason we want to cut down some demand is because if we don't do that, we just run out of cars. So it was really, there was some objective of we want to make sure there's always some cars available. So that's the objective. And the lever we can tune back and forth is to control demand via price. And the way it happened was at 5 p.m. or 4:30, across the entire Bay Area, prices would elevate. And it wasn't, and that was the good first pass. But then we wanted to make it more sensitive to, sensitive to geometry, space, geography, I should say. So yes, it might be a rush hour and you might want to raise prices in San Francisco, but Oakland didn't need its prices raised. So it looks like we have to do some differential pricing. I shouldn't use the word differential pricing. That's actually a technique in pricing. We had to just make it more sensitive to space and time. And so then I and the few other data scientists, we were just a team of 4, we turned this into an economics problem. And we said clearly, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What's our objective? Can we express that mathematically? And if the objective was some amount of availability, you can turn that into mathematics. And then we independently studied the elasticity of demand with respect to price. And so that we could say, if I were set to set price here, we think we could cut demand down to there, and the result would be this amount of availability. So you had to be able to measure supply, demand, and that price elasticity curve. And so this was what I would now call the first decision service that I was part of. And yeah, I mean, the concept of a decision service is something we can talk about soon, but I would call it the first decision service, at least at Lyft.
Okay. So, how did the business react to that? So you're a team of 4. You've done some mathematical modeling. You've come back with some initial findings. What was the response from the business?
Well, I personally messed it up a fair amount. At one point, well, we knew at the time, Uber and Lyft were about neck and neck in terms of funding and popularity. And everybody knew that Uber was the bad guys because they were doing things like 8x pricing. Like, how can you make somebody pay 8x if it's a rainstorm and they really need to get to the hospital? And yet Uber was doing it, and they were defending that they were doing it. At Lyft, we had a policy, don't be those guys. And so we had a cap on how much we were willing to multiply the price. And interestingly, our elasticity curves, if you didn't put on that constraint, our elasticity curves also would have suggested, hey, now's the right time to 8x the price. And so we figured that, okay, this must be what Uber is doing. And now we just have a different objective on top. So Uber's objective might have been very similar to Lyft's, but they didn't have the constraint of let's never go beyond 3x. And so that was interesting. So how did I get it wrong? Well, I'm going to be a little bit technical here, but when you have this price elasticity curve, that curve looks like the following. It says, at a given price, I expect conversion to be some percent. So hypothetically, if price is 0, everybody's going to convert. Hey, free rides. Why not take the ride that I just requested? And on the other side, if you make price $1 billion, there's going to be 0% conversion. Nobody's willing to pay $1 billion for a ride. And then, so from going from $0 up to $1 billion, it's monotonically decreasing, some nice gentle curve. Now, here's the mistake. All of our data is collected around the $5 to $50 range. And yet the model brazenly is willing to give me a response if I ask it, hey, what would happen at $500? So even though it has business telling me what the conversion might be between $5 and $50, if I ask it at $500, it'll say, oh, Tim, here's your probability of conversion. So my mistake was believing that the model knew what it was talking about in those unexplored regions. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, from what I say now, I'm sure all the data scientists out there are rolling their eyes about what a dumb mistake I made, but I made it. And so when the algorithm suggested, hey, you should, 5x or 10x, I know we kept that at 3, but if it suggested we should be going significantly higher right now, we did so. We went all the way up to that 3x or whatever that hard cap was, even though we didn't have sufficient data to know exactly how the system would behave. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing that we had the cap. And you know what? I bet Uber, when they were 8xing things, they were making the same mistake. Read this more.
Interesting.
Ethereal regions. So we didn't get the conversion that the model suggested. So I'll pause there.
It's interesting that you talk about sufficient data, right? That was one of the things you said, when you had sufficient data, if you had sufficient data. And, one of the things that we really want to hit on this idea of kind of massive potential or massive potholes is clearly at Lyft or at Uber, there are billions of data points that are being collected, and, you can get to that scale. But it seems like in a lot of places, AI projects, ML projects, you read about how most of them fail. And one of the things it seems that may be an issue is insufficient data. When you think about kind of what is not working today in AI, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you say this is why there are so many projects that just flat out don't work, whether it's fault on behalf of the data scientists or it's actually the data? What are the key things in your mind?
Yeah, I would say it's expectations that are set improperly. We have examples of companies who have doubled down on data science and machine learning, and it's paid off for them immensely. Google is an easy example. They were first to do so. They made an investment of it. I mean, their founders themselves were PhDs in computer science at Stanford. So they already had the faith that this could be done. And so then they invested properly. And of course, it helps that they were early compared to other people. But now you have a bunch of companies who can see the promise, but they're not sure what it means to invest in data science properly. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of the investment and the management. So the investment is Well, let me look at the management for a moment. Data scientists generally, being math folks, are introverted and not your most charismatic leaders who can sway a CEO to do this or that. And so you don't have a whole lot of mature representation on the data, somebody who's going to defend the data scientists, the individual contributors within data science. And without that leader, the data scientists are being held to expectations that are unrealistic, or they're, probably unrealistic expectations are being made of them.
Okay.
They're also not being given the support because they don't know how to ask for the support. And the support they need is a certain amount of data engineering and also full stack engineering support, the people who are writing the app themselves. An example would be a data scientist needs dependable data. That data is usually coming out of logs generated by the full stack engineers. But when full stack engineers log data, they're not necessarily thinking about who's consuming it. And so it's okay sometimes if a log system breaks. Okay, so we missed a few logs. The app didn't go down, so who really cares? Mm-hmm. But who does care is the data scientists who were trying to train models based on that data. And if their logs are always spotty or inconsistent or breaking, what can they do? And so the data scientist either needs to know how to ask or demand or negotiate to have that dependent data, or or that organization needs a leader to do that negotiation on their behalf.
Okay. So it's interesting that most of the challenges you see seem to be more focused on leadership and communication, as opposed to the actual models themselves or the more technical aspects of the craft.
Yeah, I would bet that a lot of the models, when we talk about machine learning failing, it's probably not because the model was bad. It's because the execution all the way up to it's in production with 99.99% uptime, that's the part that's failing. Okay. And that takes the conviction from the entire team that we're going to make this work. You can't just hire one data scientist and expect them to do all of that stuff by him or herself.
Okay. So I'm sure you probably heard of the phrase, the trough of disillusionment, right? Which is this idea that, you have a technology.
You froze for a moment.
Can you see me now?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry about the freezing.
You've probably heard this phrase, the trough of disillusionment, and this idea that you have a technology, there's massive hype around it, there's all kinds of expectations, and then for a variety of reasons, the technology isn't quite ready, or it doesn't advance as quickly as you expect, and you go into kind of a level of disillusionment around it. And I'm wondering in AI, and kind of, because AI is such a buzzword today, it's everywhere. Do you think that's happening? And if so, regardless, what does that mean for if you look out the next 5 to 10 years, how is our society, how's our economy going to change based on AI and ML kind of advancements?
It's interesting. I would say there might have been a trough of disillusionment over the last few years, but I think we're coming out of it. And perhaps a little bit, cynically, it's a lot due to a couple of things. One is, finally, you've got people who built their careers at Google and Uber and Lyft and Amazon and places that have invested properly in data science. They're coming out of there saying, you know what, I think I understand a tool. I can make a tool that everybody can use now, even though we developed in-house over the last decade. Mm-hmm. What would be inefficient, by the way, is if every company forthgoing had to spend a decade redeveloping everything that Uber and Google have developed for themselves. Yep. So now you've got technologists coming out of these companies, figured it out, and now they're making software that more people can use and skip a generation. So that is one way in which we're coming out of any trough. is finally we've got a lot of startups within machine learning, data science that are trying to find the common pain points and solve it for dozens of companies at once instead of only one company at a time. Two, this has also been hastened by the pandemic, is for better or for worse, we've seen that machines are ultimately cheaper to maintain and develop and scale than an army of conscious humans. And so, yeah, I think before the pandemic, there was already research that said that the global market for machine learning was growing about 43% year over year. And I wouldn't be surprised if those forecasts have to be ramped up because of the pandemic. I mean, to say it clearly, nobody is scrambling to hire more humans because humans are fallible and they get sick and they can't come to the office anyway. So we need to replace it with machines. At least that's what the businesses are saying. Morally and ethically, do we need to replace humans with machines? That's a hard one because it leads to a lot of disparity in wealth, as we've seen. Nonetheless, here we are. So it's possible that the coming out of the trough of disillusionment is accompanied by increasing wealth gaps.
So that's interesting, and just from a societal viewpoint, I'm curious to hear kind of your perspective. So if we take an industry like let's take the trucking industry, right? So if Elon Musk and Tesla and GM and whoever else is developing these 18-wheelers that are autonomous vehicles, and we just wipe out hundreds of thousands of truck drivers. I mean, first of all, that seems like a very kind of realistic thing that's going to happen soon. Mm-hmm. And if it does, I mean, you're a data scientist, you're in this world. How should we respond to that as a society? Or is this wealth gap is a reality that we should expect to continue moving forward?
Can you repeat that again? My internet clogged. Please.
Yeah, sure. So the question was just taking trucking as an example. If in that industry, if in the next 5 years, all those truckers are eliminated and they're replaced with robots, right? Autonomous drivers. Mm-hmm. And you have the data science viewpoint, you've got the skill set. How is society supposed to handle, I mean, from your viewpoint, how does society respond to something like that?
Well, it's possible that this has huge political impact. We've seen the common man become a lot more, defending his or her territory. I'm sorry, I'm just using the common man as the phrase here. You've got populism, you've also got now socialism. All of this stuff is making a resurgence. It's how do we protect the people against machines? And so it's possible that the entire world moves, or at least the Western world moves even more toward, or maybe just America moves more toward socialism as a way to combat machines taking over human jobs. Mm-hmm. It's possible. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's possible that might happen. That might be what happened.
Something like a minimum wage for a universal minimum wage type of scenario.
Yeah, and you know what? That actually might be achievable. I mean, I think I'm not an economist, but I can imagine there's some economists out there who thinks that minimum wage isn't going to work. All it's going to do is make bread more expensive. Because once supermarkets see that everybody can afford bread, they're going to raise the price, and all of a sudden, $20,000 a year becomes $0 a year. Again, that's not my view. I think it's plausible. I'm not the economist. But with the increase of AI, that could also be the solution. It's great. Now we can, for very cheap, have robots grow our bread, or bake our bread. Mm-hmm. And in which case, okay, there was zero cost to delivering that goods anyway, so it all evened out.
Sure.
Is this going to, if anything, it might just overall increase the wealth of the world There will still be poor people, there will still be rich people, there still might be a big gap, but at least the bottom isn't going to be where it is now. It's going to be higher than where it is now.
So the
And that
overall
could
quality
be,
of life may
yeah,
increase.
right.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, it's a fascinating topic. So let's just dive in more to Decide, because I'd like to kind of give the listeners here, why did you start this company? Give us some background on kind of where you think your fit is in the market, and yeah, just give us a little bit of perspective there.
Yeah, excited to talk about Decide. So I alluded to certain things throughout our conversation. One is there are two epochs, and now there's a third. That third epoch being, how do we know that these machines are doing in production what we hoped they would? Because there's a million things that can go wrong. I also talked about people who have built their careers on helping Lyft and Uber figure out data science, now breaking out of those companies and saying, you know what, I can make a piece of software that solves everybody's problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I'm part of that movement, having been at Lyft and Uber and now having started my own company. So here's what it does. Decide is, it's a software as a service. It's a monitoring tool that actually optimizes your KPIs through decision diagnostics. Let me unpack that. It's like New Relic for machine learning with more contextual awareness. So here's the use case. A data science team, and that could be data scientists plus data engineers, and maybe there's a PM in the mix. They've been given a KPI that they need to impact this half or something like that, such as revenue or growth. They've also identified which lever they want to tune. In one case we already talked about was pricing. You can imagine that pricing, you can increase your revenues by setting prices. So I've mentioned two things right now. There's a KPI at the top. That's what we're trying, that's our goal, what we call good. We have a lever that we're trying to move back and forth in order to increase that good. That's our price in this example. And all of that on the bottom layer is supported by predictive models. And so when you're setting prices, you're saying, hey, what would happen to my revenue if I set the price here? Well, what would happen to my revenue if I set my price there? And then you can choose the optimal price, the one that is most likely to expect to increase your expected revenue. So you've got this what I call the decision service in many different forms. It's for pricing. You're saying, which price am I going to set in order to impact my revenues? It's also used in fraud detection. Like which transactions should I accept or reject in order to increase my profits? You know, if you admit a bad transaction, you end up losing money because you have to pay for the goods or a chargeback fee or something like that. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if your model is not good enough, you could be eliminating a lot of good guys from making transactions. So you've got this in pricing, you've got this in fraud, you've also got this in customer targeting. It's like again, I'm trying to increase revenue. Which customers should I send which emails to? And what's my prediction of their response if I send them this email versus that email? So we're in that world of making real-time decisions, and a million things can go wrong, such as one of my inputs, one of my pieces of data gets corrupted along the way. What used to be strings is now integers, or vice versa, or everything turned into nulls because some pipeline broke. And anytime something like that happens, I end up making bad decisions. And if I'm not looking at the right time, the right place, I'm really losing money. Mm-hmm. So Decide is that monitoring software that says, okay, when you made this decision, I know you expected to make this much money off of it. Let's actually compare this with the actual outcome. Oh, you only made 50 cents instead of $1? What went wrong? Well, let's look at all of the downstream dependencies, or the upstream dependencies, the dependencies for your decision. And now I can do analysis, as long as your decision service is structured in a simple way, I can do the analysis that says, aha, it looks like on January 3rd, there was a deployment. This feature changed shape. And through some statistical reasoning, we see that this could have been responsible for a $10,000 loss over a week or something.
So do you envision data science teams using kind of your product to is that going to be like on a daily basis or on a monthly basis to actually kind of assess how efficient and how effective the models are that they have in production?
Yeah, it'll be used the same way that full stack engineers are using New Relic and App Dynamics.
Got it.
It's the thing you need to have in production. Otherwise, you're going to hear from the CEO in a bad way that something broke. Yeah, the most embarrassing way to figure out a mistake is to hear from the CEO. Like,
right.
Why was I charged, $40 for this, 20-second trip I took on Lyft?
And Tim, talk a little bit about the go-to-market. How are you kind of interacting with clients, and kind of where do you see as kind of the right entry point? Is it the data scientist? Is it the CTO? Is it, how are you interacting with clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of the positioning of this thing, or one aspect, which also leads to the go-to-market, is this piece of software. Right now, nobody's doing it well. Nobody is in the business of monitoring their models after they go into production. They might monitor it for a week or two to show that this new idea is better than the old one. But after that, when they should continue to monitor it, nobody is. So there's this inherent lack of accountability with how this thing got into production in the first place. Data scientists who might have conceived of the model and built the laptop version of it are not the ones who put it into production. They're not the ones who are doing the real-time feature engineering. The people who did the real-time feature engineering and all the production work are not statisticians, so they don't know when something is quote unquote broken. So again, yeah, the data scientists are not equipped to fix something once it's in production. Those who are equipped to fix something in production don't know when it needs fixing. And then the PM who ran the entire project, and they're the ones who own the KPI. For them, they have the least visibility of anybody. So there's this huge gap in accountability that this piece of software is filling. So who does this market to? It markets to a lot to product teams. The installation will be done by the engineer or the machine learning engineer, something like that. But really, this shows a PM, look, you own this KPI. Here's the decision, the automated decision that you oversaw the creation of in order to impact this KPI. And here's how it's misbehaving. And so now you have a prioritized list of what to fix first.
Fantastic, powerful. So as you look forward, kind of, are most enterprises, large enterprises, going to be using machine learning in the future? And how should our listeners think about machine learning? Is it one model running the business? I know that's completely not realistic. Or is it, machine learning models all across the enterprise? And, how then will your platform, your solution kind of orchestrate multiple models in production?
Yeah, good question. So there's going to be multiple models. I think that businesses are going to have to get smarter about making sure that they're clear about what their objectives are.
Mm-hmm.
Too often, you'll have two different teams who have different objectives that actually compete with one another. Simple example is you've got the growth team and you've got the pricing team. The pricing team might be trying to optimize for revenue. The growth team is trying to optimize for growth. And if they ever get their streams crossed, you could have a war about how to set prices. Yeah. If you want growth, I promise you the answer is set your price at 0 or even negative 1,000. Pay your customers to take rides. You'll get growth. But that's contrary to revenue, at least in some comfortable short term. So CEOs and exec teams owe it to all of data science, owe it to their companies and the people who are making decisions below them to be clear about what the KPIs are and what levers they're allowed to touch to impact these KPIs. You can't have two different pricing teams with different objectives. Nonsense. So for enterprises, they already have their models in production. They will continue to have that. But over time, I think what we're going to see is a lot of, you won't need to build data science teams as big as Uber's and Lyft's data science teams. I think a lot of the data, like if Lyft and Uber could be rebuilt today, instead they might be outsourcing a lot of their decision making, their algorithmic machine learning decision making, to software that already does it for them. We've already seen this in full stack engineering. You don't hire engineers to reinvent networking. No, you just go to AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. It already has all the different networking styles you'd want. You just pick and choose. And what you hire, what the company hires, is an engineer who understands how to use those tools and knows which tools to pick. Similarly, in data science, a company is not going to hire somebody to train a brand new model of this. It's instead, you're going to hire a data scientist who knows how to use all the tools that are out there, and they can quickly serve your company's bread and butter by piecing together existing tools.
Got it.
That means the data scientists who are currently working at Lyft and Uber are instead going to go work for those third-party software providers, such as coming to work with me.
Interesting. Well, I mean, this has been fascinating. I think we covered a lot. Talked about your background, the 3 epochs that you see, the reality of AI and some of the challenges that we're facing. And I think we got a great kind of insight into Decide and some of the exciting things you're working on. Tim, really appreciate you being on the show. And if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out?
Find me at tim@decide.io. That's DCYD.io. Come to our website, send us a note there, and we'll be happy to hook you up with a trial, get to know your business goals. We can even do some complimentary services to help you integrate with this more modern way of saving yourself money, frankly. It's like all of your algorithmic decisions, you don't know how they're performing. With Decide, you'll be able to see explicitly how much money you're losing and how much money you can recoup by fixing little things.
Fantastic. All right, Tim, I appreciate it. Thanks again for being on the show.